Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and the winner for the poll for today was about the legal fantasies that Brexiteers seem to be pushing. So there's been a few of these recently I sort of want to go through. Now, one thing that's really noticeable in comments on the various videos in this channel is the maddening belief that we can get legally and politically impossible outcomes from Brexit. And a great many of those are based on references to treaties which are not actually what people think they are. Now, it's one thing to not believe in the aims of the EU, whether political or economic, but if views are based on facts which are not only false, but actually easy to verify that they're false, then you can see why it is that a majority of educated people didn't actually vote to leave the EU. Because if Brexiteers are relying on convincing people who will buy everything they say and check nothing, and what they're coming out is a load of nonsense, it does sort of show you where that divide is. For example, and this is the maddest one of all first, I've had for the last few months occasional comments about the Lisbon Treaty. Oh, we must leave now because the Lisbon Treaty has been enacted in 2020 or 2021 or 2022, depending on who's making the comment. Now, the first time I saw that, I just shrugged it off because I thought, what are you talking about? The Lisbon Treaty has been in operation for nearly 3 decades. It's the treaty which transformed the old EC into the EU that we have now. And it was done with the UK government a key driving force in it. It also received a number of amendments before going live due to disagreements in various parliaments, including our own, until everyone was satisfied. Some of the viewers here will have lived entirely under the blanket of the Lisbon Treaty. So is it any wonder that although I try and retain some acceptance that there are those who wish to leave for some reasons worthy of respect, the vast majority are just coming across as dumb as hell. They're panicking about a treaty which is already in full operation, when anyone can just use the internet to look up the truth of whatever Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nigel Farage and the rest of their multimillionaire friends come up with. It's not even like there's a clause that comes into effect in the next few years we need to worry about, or at any time still in our future. There's nothing in there. It's already there. It was done and dusted over a generation ago. So how can such brainless comments ever do anything to convince myself and others more and more that actually the bulk at least of Brexiteers are just dangerous fantasies? Buffoons even. And although these same people seem to know about Article 50, yeah, if you say, about extending Article 50, they know what that is, even though they probably haven't read that either. Well, I know that they haven't because what do they think it's an article of? It's Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty. People keep asking me how I managed to stay sane throughout this process, and I just have to refer to the Serenity Prayer. It's worth a look if you're not familiar with it. It's only a few lines. But this sort of thing is actually a serious assault on my sanity. I can't even think down to the level that is panicking about a treaty coming into force when it came into force 30 years ago. And anyone who doesn't know that doesn't know anything about the EU or the UK's relationship with the EU. Nothing at all. And how can such a person have any confidence that what they're saying is correct if they know nothing? So that one is particularly crazy because, that is particularly maddening because I don't even know where it came from. It's like, I can't blame that on Jacob Rees-Mogg or Nigel Farage or anyone like that because I've not heard any of those prominent Brexiteers talk about it. But I get so many comments, and I have over such a period of time, and it's not from the same person always, that there has to be a central source. It must be coming from somewhere, but I don't know where. Unlike the next banner legal device, basically GATT24. Now, this one started doing the rounds a few months ago after Jacob Rees-Mogg said that, GATT Article 24 says that we can leave the EU without a deal and we still get to trade with the EU tariff and customs free for 10 years. Now, I don't know how dumb you have to be to believe this, but the following things need to be borne in mind. 1. The article says no such thing. I've actually talked about this recently. It came up recently, so I don't want to labour the point, but the article in question is for negotiating a customs union or for enhancing or otherwise changing an existing customs union. Jacob Rees-Mogg and his ilk are opposed to the formation of a customs union between the UK and the EU. So this article has no relevance for them whatsoever. The reference to the 10 years is for countries with an existing customs union who wish to change it. But the UK doesn't have an existing customs union agreement with the EU if we leave without a deal. We don't have any arrangement because Parliament aren't voting for it. Our current relationship with the EU is not as a result of an agreement that we signed. It's as a result of being a member state. All the trade agreements are signed as for the EU as a whole, including the UK. So there is no agreement in existence anywhere that you will find on either the UK government website or the EU government website, which list all the treaties where you will see any customs union agreement between the UK and the EU specifically. So we don't have one. We don't have an agreement with the EU any more than Doncaster has a trade agreement with London. Of course, it can still trade because they're members of the same organisation. In this case, the UK. 2, if it were true, why would the UK and the EU countries be spending billions in coming up with systems to try and manage the sudden imposition of checks at borders and tariffs? Why are UK businesses deserting the UK like rats from a sinking ship if there's 10 years before we have an issue? Think about that for a second. And then 3, let's say you can't be bothered to read the article for yourself. So you just choose to believe the guy in the top hat who drinks champagne because he's totally got the back of the working poor. Let's also say that you don't watch the news at all. And so we're oblivious to the billions of pounds and euros worth of preparations that are ongoing to manage the board and trader problems. But you listen to Jacob Rees-Mogg. So if he thinks that GATT24 really keeps the borders open for 10 more years, why is he trying to say that the solution to the Irish border issue is a technological solution, which, by the way, doesn't even exist? Why doesn't he just say that GATT24 will let us keep that open? When you listen to a guy who's not even consistent with what he says, seriously, how little thought are leavers putting into what is the biggest constitutional change to Britain since the Normans invaded? The fact is that the Irish border issue is no different to our general trading arrangements. It's just much more serious there. A solution that works for one would work for the other. So why is he separating the two things out as if they're two different issues? And now, just this week, we've had Jacob Rees-Mogg pretending to soften his stance on Theresa May's withdrawal agreement. He said that he would accept an appendix to the withdrawal agreement containing legally binding limits on the backstop. And of course, any limits on the backstop mean it's not a backstop. To someone not really understanding what the agreement is, you might think, well, that's a workaround somehow. As if the main problem is that it's too difficult to change the legal text, so just add something that overrides it. But that's not the issue. The legal text hasn't been ratified by a single nation yet. And so agreeable changes to the legal text are not difficult from a clerical point of view. It's quite easy to amend if all sides agree, in fact. The reason that the EU say it's non-negotiable is because the only thing the UK are trying to change is the backstop. It's the backstop that's non-negotiable, not technically the text. The backstop itself is a legal imperative. That's why it can't be changed, and Rees-Mogg knows that. For example, let's say we wanted to add a clause that will commit us to a comprehensive and permanent customs union with the EU, and the transition period would not end until we'd formally completed that process. I'm quite sure the other EU members would be delighted to change the legal text in that regard and extend for as long as is necessary to agree the finer points and get it ratified. In fact, they've said as much regarding Jeremy Corbyn's proposal for just such a change. But that's not what he wants. He's claiming to want something that he knows full well is impossible because what he really wants is no deal. But he doesn't want us to say that because then it's more difficult to blame others when people see what no deal is in reality. I mean, people keep trying to point out to me, oh, no, he's just said he wants this appendix, to be legally binding, but not actually change the text. But it does change the text because the text has the conditions for the backstop. What he wants adding in is something that completely removes that and changes what the backstop is. In fact, it changes it to something that's not a backstop. Finally, the Attorney General himself, Geoffrey Cox, the only person amongst all these Brexiteers who actually has a legal mind, was last week supposed to put plans for a legal workaround to the backstop issue to the public and then discuss it with the EU in terms of how it's going to solve all these problems. At the last minute, however, surprise, surprise, the speech was pulled, and now everything's gone very quiet, not even talking about it. Now again, it was just the latest in a long line of lies, basically, told to make legal imperatives sound like political wishes. And the problem is that nobody with equal prominence to these people is calling them out. For example, people know that Theresa May campaigned for Remain. She has also ensured that the cabinet has been an equal mix of Remain and Leave, which actually tips the balance in favour of Leave, really, because they have a disproportionate influence compared to their backing in the party. But I'll come to that point at the end. The point here is that the sort of people who don't fact check or critically think about what they're told might reasonably suppose that, let's say, Jacob Rees-Mogg, Geoffrey Cox and Liam Fox were lying about the situation, then surely one of the Remain ministers would be calling them out on it. You'd think the Prime Minister herself would do so. After all, it's one thing to commit to Brexit because of a referendum, albeit an illegal one, but there should be no motivation to lie about the realities of the process that you don't really believe in anyway. So why have Remain ministers not called out their duplicitous colleagues? Well, it's because they've all been convinced that disunity is harmful to the party, which it is, and that any disunity would actually be their fault, not somehow the fault of those telling these falsehoods. They've been told that the Brexiteers won't behave, so they have to rise above the petty squabbling and not rock the boat. And they've also been convinced that the party is more important than the country or its citizens. So in a way, it's hard to be mad at the sort of stupidity that lets people believe that GATT24 is our saviour, or that the Lisbon Treaty is coming, or indeed that there's a legal solution that eliminates the backstop to everyone's satisfaction without the need for a customs union. It's unfortunate that we don't educate people to think critically, but that is a deliberate policy of our governments over decades, quite frankly, not just the latest one. But in the absence of that, one half of the argument, keeping quiet for fear of splitting a political party, is giving the very strong impression that everyone is accepting what's been said with these legal issues. After all, it's only EU leaders that are calling them out, and they're all evil and unelected, of course. Just as a little aside to finish, though. So, with one of the downsides of Theresa May making sure that she stocks her cabinet with an equal number of Remain and Leave ministers is that it dramatically reduces her choice of Leave MPs because there are relatively few of them. It's not like there's a small handful like in Labour, but they are in the minority. Now, one consequence of this, of course, is Chris Grayling, who's got himself into the news this week twice. He remains in cabinet as Transport Secretary, even though his incompetence has made a complete mess of the extra transport routes that we need in order to try and cope with the border issues in the event of a no deal. And now it's been revealed the UK has had to fork over 33 million quid to Eurotunnel, who were of course taking the UK government to court. We've settled out of court because we're banged to rights. And it's all because of the dishonest way in which he awarded the ferry contracts, including, remember, to a company that doesn't even have any ferries. So the amount of the taxpayers' money that this individual has wasted today went up by more money than he'll ever see in his lifetime. And although he is a multimillionaire in his own right, using the word right with Chris Grayling, it sounds mad, even if he contributed his own fortune to compensate this mess, wouldn't even come close to covering it. And that's without even mentioning the £500 million of taxpayers' money that he's completely written off from his time as Justice Secretary. His disastrous plans to privatise sections of the penal system have just this week completely blown up in the news. It's a scheme that failed so badly, it was so serious, that the government have had to face up to the bad press and end the scheme over a year early, because trying to keep it quiet would have just made the situation even more disastrous. So that's 500 million quid completely gone up in smoke. I mean, I could argue that it's difficult enough to appoint competent ministers in good times when a typical government needs about 100 ministers altogether, over a fifth of whom are the most senior cabinet ministers. But usually, even a strong government with a good majority is not going to have usually more than 400 MPs. And it's a job that requires zero qualifications and training, or indeed any discernible skills. So out of those 400, let's say you're in a strong position, you basically need a quarter of them to be ministers. Now, of those, quite a lot of them will have been MPs that have only just become MPs. So they're too junior, they're too inexperienced in parliamentary procedures to really take on even a junior ministerial role. Some of them are so solid within their constituency party or are close to retirement that they'll never toe the party line, so they're not reliable ministers either. You know, you also get quite a lot of MPs who are made the candidate for that area because they're very loyal, they'll do as they're told, but they're not very bright. They've got just about enough brains to walk through the right door when it comes to a vote. That doesn't actually leave a huge number of experienced and intelligent and educated MPs to pick from. And that's in good times. So then to further restrict your choice by selecting half from a minority position in the party in the form of Brexiteers, in a minority government where the number is close to 300 MPs, simply invites incompetence on this scale. And the reason why the Prime Minister says that Chris Grayling has her full confidence is simply a combination of two things. Not wanting to further expose the chaos in her government, and she doesn't really have anyone to replace him with. So there you go. That's my little rundown of the main Brexiteer legal fantasies and just the maddening thought of the fact that these things are really easy to look up and why don't people do it. Hope you enjoyed the video and found it interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe for further content and click the bell notification. And the poll for tomorrow's topics will be going up as well. So until next time, I'll see you later.